She told me her ex was coming to our party 3 days before it happened. Her voice was steady when she said it, almost casual, but her eyes stayed on me a little too long, waiting for a reaction. "Be cool," she said. Then after a pause, "Or it's over." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that was the only sound that came out. The moment passed and we kept talking about the drinks, the playlist, the people who'd show up, but something inside me stayed still, cold and bright, like glass. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself she was allowed to have history, that this was what adults did. They stayed composed. They didn't let small things get under their skin. But that night I couldn't sleep. Every thought circled back to that single word. Cool. What did that even mean in her mouth? Indifference, trust, or just silence? I kept rehearsing the evening in my head, like a scene I wasn't sure I'd survive without embarrassing myself. When the night finally came, the apartment smelled like citrus and nervous energy. She looked good, deliberate, radiant in a way that felt planned. People arrived early, laughing too loud, carrying bottles and excuses. I played host the way I always do, smiling in fragments, nodding at the right times, making sure no one noticed the tension in my jaw. When he arrived, I knew instantly. You don't need to be told who someone's ex is. The air shifts. His presence had a shape, tall, comfortable, the kind of ease that only comes from being familiar with a place you no longer own. They hugged, quick, polite, but something in it stung. I felt it deep, sharp and clean, like an old cut reopening under light pressure. I told myself to breathe. I walked to the kitchen, refilled my glass, and pretended to study the labels on the bottles. I could hear them talking behind me, low voices, small laughter. I caught my reflection in the oven door, calm, detached, like someone else entirely. I almost admired that version of me. I thought, this is what being cool looks like. But the truth was, I didn't feel cool. I felt erased. The night stretched longer than I expected. People drifted in and out of conversations, music looping through the same 3 playlists. I found myself watching her in small intervals, the tilt of her head, the way her hand brushed the table when she laughed, the fraction of distance between her and him that I kept trying to measure. I wasn't angry, not really. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was quieter, heavier, a mix of envy and fear, like standing outside your own house and realizing someone else remembers the furniture better than you do. I told myself I was fine. I told myself it was only a few hours, but my chest ached with the effort of pretending not to care. Every time she looked at me, it was brief, almost courteous, as if she was checking that I was behaving. I smiled when she did. I became the version of myself she needed me to be, polite, agreeable, unbothered. The kind of man who knows his place in the room and doesn't ask for more. When he finally left, the air seemed to loosen. People began to say their goodbyes. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd finished a performance. When the door closed behind the last guest, she exhaled and leaned against the counter. "You were great tonight," she said. I nodded. She kissed me, soft, quick, already half distracted by her phone. I stood there for a moment, glass in hand, trying to feel proud of myself for not making a scene. But pride didn't come. Just a hollow sense of completion, like finishing a task you never wanted to start. Later, in bed, she fell asleep almost immediately. I stayed awake, listening to her breathing, thinking about the strange math of relationships, how one person's comfort can come at the cost of another's silence. I realized I hadn't said a real sentence all night. Only nods, small agreements, the language of someone carefully containing himself. I thought of his face, the way he looked at her like someone reading an old book, already knowing every line. There was no malice in it, just familiarity. And maybe that was what hurt the most, that quiet evidence of a world I could never enter, one that existed before me and somehow still did. Around 3 a.m., when the city outside had gone still, I got up and walked to the living room. The air smelled of wine and fading perfume. The glasses on the table caught the dim light like tiny ghosts. I sat down, stared at the door, and tried to convince myself I hadn't been tested, that there was no hidden meaning in her challenge. But deep down, I knew there was. She'd wanted to see if I could exist quietly beside her past, if I could hold my place without shaking. I had passed, technically. I'd been cool, but it didn't feel like strength. It felt like disappearance. When she woke in the morning, she smiled at me, asked if I wanted coffee, as if nothing had shifted. I said yes, of course, because that's what you do. That's what being cool means. You let the moment slide through you, clean and soundless, pretending it doesn't leave a mark. But as she turned away, I realized I'd already started to forget the sound of my own voice. The morning after the party, the apartment smelled like stale wine and perfume. She moved through it easily, humming to herself as she picked up glasses and plates, light as if nothing had happened. I helped in silence, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a complaint. She talked about work, the mess, the playlist, things I couldn't seem to care about. I kept thinking how strange it was that she could sleep so soundly beside me while my head had been awake the entire night. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't touch the body, only the mind. It makes you quiet in a way that feels like disappearing. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, and decided not to ask. Sometimes not asking is easier for both people. I went through the motions of the day, cleaning, shopping, small errands, but the party followed me. Not as anger, more as an echo I couldn't place. I thought about his laugh, the sound of her voice when she spoke to him, the ease between them. It wasn't jealousy anymore, it was comparison. I realized how often I measured myself without knowing the scale. That night she'd said I was great, that I'd been cool, and I'd nodded like someone accepting an award for something they didn't want to win. The truth was, I had no idea what she'd wanted to see from me. Maybe she was testing how much of myself I'd swallow to keep the peace, maybe I was testing it too. Either way, I'd learned that silence can be a language, and I was becoming fluent. The days after blurred together, work filled time but not space. People around me laughed, argued, existed, and I moved through it like a ghost rehearsing old gestures. I began to notice small distances between us, the way her texts became shorter, her responses delayed but polite. She wasn't pulling away in any visible way, but there was a new rhythm, slower, more careful. I didn't confront it. I didn't ask if she was okay. I just mirrored her, message for message, silence for silence. It felt fair. I told myself this was balance, not withdrawal. At night we still slept beside each other, but I'd wake up at odd hours, the room dim and still, her breathing steady, mine shallow. I'd look at the ceiling and think about that word again, cool. It followed me like a rule I hadn't agreed to. I'd been so careful to stay composed that I'd stopped being present. I realized I didn't know the last time I'd told her something real about myself. Every thought I had passed through a filter first. Would this make me seem needy, insecure, dramatic? The result was a version of me that even I barely recognized, agreeable, calm, non-threatening. A shadow trained to smile. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me for a moment, expression unreadable. Then she'd look away, and I'd wonder if she missed the person I used to be or if this quiet version suited her better. The question never left my mouth. I carried it around like a pebble in my pocket, small but impossible to ignore. There's a comfort in routines, even when they're built on distance. We cooked dinner, watched shows, laughed in the right places. From the outside, we looked fine. Maybe that's what relationships are, performances you both agree to maintain. I started writing again, not about her, but about the feeling of being invisible beside someone you love. I didn't show her the pages. I didn't even read them back. I just needed a place to put the noise I couldn't say out loud. Some nights I'd stay up late, scrolling through pictures from the party. Everyone smiling, glasses raised, the blur of light and motion. In one photo, she's laughing at something he said. I remember the moment I was across the room, pretending to listen to someone else. Looking at it now, it felt less like betrayal and more like proof of something fragile between us. A gap too small to notice when you're happy, too wide to cross when you're not. I learned to stop blaming her for that gap. It wasn't cruelty, it was just difference. She wanted ease, I wanted certainty, and maybe those two things can't live in the same room. Sometimes I'd imagine what she'd say if I told her how much I'd thought about that night. She'd probably smile, tilt her head, tell me I was overthinking it. Maybe she'd be right. Maybe none of it mattered except in my head. But even if that's true, it doesn't change what it did to me. It taught me how quickly connection turns into performance, how quiet resentment grows roots when you feed it enough silence. I don't think she meant to make me feel small. I think I did that to myself, trying so hard to be the version of a man she could keep without conflict. It's strange how love can turn into self-erasure so quietly that you mistake it for maturity. I started spending more time alone, going for long walks after work. The city looked different when you stopped talking. You start to notice patterns, lights changing, the same strangers passing, the rhythm of doors opening and closing. It felt honest in a way people didn't. No pretense, just motion. Sometimes she'd ask where I'd gone, and I'd tell her I just needed air. She never pressed. I think part of her was relieved. I didn't blame her for that either. Relief is what comes when the effort of closeness fades. It's not rejection, it's rest. I told myself we were just tired, that things would even out, but the silence between us kept deepening. We didn't fight. We didn't talk. We existed beside each other, carefully, politely, like guests overstaying a visit but too kind to admit it. I thought about ending it sometimes, not because I stopped caring, but because I couldn't tell where I ended and the performance began. Each day I stayed, the line blurred more. Still, I didn't leave. Habit is stronger than honesty, and somewhere inside, I was still hoping she'd see the effort in my quietness, that she'd read it as love, not absence. That's the mistake I kept making, thinking silence could be understood. It never is. It only grows heavier until it becomes the only thing left to share. The morning felt lighter than it should have. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from something having already ended. I'd left before the sun rose, before she opened her eyes. I moved through the apartment slowly, careful not to wake her, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to leave the air undisturbed, the last thing between us that hadn't been argued or explained. The street outside was still wet from rain. I stood for a moment on the curb, listening to the early sounds of the city, feeling nothing sharp, nothing final, just a slow recognition of stillness. I thought of how often I'd stood like this before, waiting for her, coming home, telling myself that silence could fix things if I just learned how to hold it properly. But silence doesn't fix. It only fills space when words fail, and ours had failed long ago. As I walked, the city began to wake, lights flicking on, windows opening, the soft, indifferent rhythm of other lives beginning. I wondered if she'd stir soon, if she'd reach across the bed and find the absence before she fully understood it. Not panic, just that pause between sleep and realization, the soft confusion before memory sets in. She'd know, eventually, that I hadn't left in anger. There'd be no note, no last text, no gesture asking to be remembered. Just absence. Clean, unadorned, absolute. That's what I wanted. Not revenge, not pity, only the quiet truth of being gone. I thought about all the nights we'd spent rehearsing the same small piece, her laughing at the right moment, me nodding on cue, to people performing affection with careful precision. I don't know when the performance ended or when it began. Maybe it never did. Maybe that's what love becomes when you hold on too long, a rhythm you can't stop even after the song ends. The wind moved through the empty street, carrying that damp smell of rain and pavement. I realized I wasn't sad, not happy either, just leveled, like standing in an empty room after the furniture's been moved out, seeing how small the space really was. I thought of her face, the way she looked past me lately, her voice softer, not unkind, but distant, the tone people use when they've already decided something they won't say aloud. I'd felt it before the party, long before her ex's name reappeared. The party was just the moment I stopped pretending not to feel it. Sometimes endings arrive quietly, like that. No fight, no revelation, only recognition. I reached the park we used to walk through on weekends, when things still felt effortless. The benches were slick with rain, the air sharp. I sat down anyway, listening to the faint rush of cars beyond the trees. My hands were cold. I thought about how much energy it takes to keep something alive when it's already stopped breathing on its own. Love, patience, hope, they all weigh the same when they settle into habit. She'd taught me how to stay calm, how to be still. I'd mistaken that lesson for strength. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I needed to believe that being quiet meant being safe. But it doesn't. Quiet can rot too, just slower, more politely. I watched the light shift through the branches and thought about how many times I'd tried to name what we were. Not broken, not perfect, just suspended. Two people afraid to disturb the dust. I don't know if she understand the way I left. Maybe she think I ran from her. Maybe she think I wanted to be found. Both are wrong. I left because staying had turned into pretending, and I'd run out of ways to pretend. There's a point where even the smallest lie starts echoing louder than truth, and that's when you know it's over. Still, a part of me hoped she'd stand at the window after waking, look at the street, and sense what I felt now, not loss, but release. That thin, fragile relief of something finally being allowed to end. I pictured her sitting on the edge of the bed, hair falling over her face, not crying, just breathing, realizing that silence has two sides, hers and mine. For the first time in months, the thought didn't hurt. It felt right, necessary. I'd always been afraid of emptiness, but walking through it now, I understood it's not a void, it's a space waiting to be filled by something honest, even if that honesty is solitude. I didn't look back. There was no need. The life we'd built had already folded in on itself, quietly, inevitably, the way soft things collapse without a sound. I walked until the city fully woke, until her name stopped repeating in my head. There would be messages later, maybe calls, but they'd come from the version of us that already didn't exist. I wasn't that man anymore. She wasn't that woman. Whatever story we'd told ourselves had reached its natural silence, the kind that doesn't ask for closure because it's already complete.